This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 245 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to learn about a system that will help you do a better job of meeting absent students' needs. One of the things they don't teach you in teacher preparation programs is how to deal with the problem of student absences. I'm not talking about major truancy issues or anything like that, just your regular one or two kids out one day, another out on a different day, one student checking out early for an appointment, three gone on another day for a field trip, that kind of thing. The normal, continual state of flux of school attendance. It's normal, it's expected, and it creates so many problems, mostly around how to keep all of your students on track with the learning that's happening in your classroom. You can create the most spectacular, engaging lesson plans, but if all your students aren't in the room when those plans are executed, catching them up can be kind of a nightmare. And despite the fact that this has been a problem for as long as school has existed, few teachers have ever figured out a foolproof plan for solving it. Today, I will offer you one approach that might work. My guest is Robert Barnett, co-founder of the Modern Classrooms Project and the author of a new book, Meet Every Learner's Needs: Redesigning Instruction so All Learners Can Succeed. In this episode, Rob is going to explain how his approach, which ultimately evolved into the framework Modern Classrooms uses, helped him solve the problem of student absences in his own classroom. And he'll show us how any teacher can get started with it in a very simple way. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, BowClips Classroom, a library of over 1.7 million ad-free, curated, curriculum-aligned videos. Access engaging content from over 650 trusted media brands and teacher-loved educational creators like TED, Amoeba Sisters, Fuse School, PBS, and Crash Course. Teachers save time with their powerful navigation tools to quickly search and filter by subject, grade, and language proficiency level to find content mapped to key learning objectives from more than 70 common curriculum standards, then share it with students in a distraction-free environment. Sign up for a free account today at cultofpedagogy.com/BCC. That's cultofpedagogy.com/BCC. Support also comes from Zern. Elementary and middle school teachers, what if you could give students more opportunities to learn and practice the same math concepts they're learning with you? That's exactly what you'll get with Zern Math. Zern is a free online math learning program with content for every concept of K-8 math. Every day, kids in tens of thousands of classrooms across the U.S. log into Zern to complete guided, interactive lessons based on leading math pedagogy. Students learn and solve problems with on-screen teachers who use visuals to make challenging grade-level math concepts intuitive. If kids get stuck, Zern lessons adapt in real time to help them work through challenges and stay on track. Zern is a nonprofit, which means every detail of their program has been designed, developed, and tested with a single goal in mind: helping every student succeed in grade-level math. Sign up for a free account today at zern.org. That's ZEARN.org. Now here's my interview with Robert Barnett about a system that will help you keep absent students on track. Hey, Robert.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
We're going to talk about dealing with absent students today, which is a always problem for teachers, and it's never really been quite solved, no matter how hacky a person gets. But before we do, let's introduce you to my audience. Tell me just a little bit about what your background is in education and what you've been working on more recently.
Of course. I'm Rob. I'm here in my hometown of Washington, D.C. I began my career as a teacher here. I taught at an independent school, and then I taught at Eastern Senior High School, which is a big public Title I high school here in DC. From there, I moved to Switzerland, where I taught at an international boarding school there. Very different culture and climate from DC public schools, but a lot of the same issues really when it came to teaching and learning. While I was there, I worked with my Eastern colleague, Kareem Farah. We decided to start the Modern Classrooms Project. We've been leading that together for the past almost 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And I have a book that just came out called Meet Every Learner's Needs, which sort of tells that story and explains how you as a listener or anyone really can take some of the things I've learned about teaching and use them to meet your learners' needs.
Yeah, and so we're going to be timing this with the publication of that book. Um, and what we decided to do was just sort of take a little small section kind of the book and talk about that. So, we're talking about today how to manage when students are absent. And so if you could start us off by just establishing the problem, because it is going to sound very familiar to anybody that has taught anyone besides just a single kid, really. What is the problem? What does it present to us as teachers? And then we'll get into what your solution was that you figured out.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I saw this in DC in a very stark way. The school where I was teaching, I remember I had a first period pre-calculus class. There were, I think, 21 students on the roster, and sometimes the first bell would ring and there would be 10 students in the room, sometimes less. And so
Mm.
that's pretty extreme. I also taught at a boarding school in Switzerland where you would think, okay, absence won't be a problem there, but it was a problem there too. Young people miss school for all sorts of reasons,
Mm.
activities, illness, family things. And as a teacher, it's so hard to deal with that, right? Because if it's Wednesday and you have a student who came in and they weren't there on Monday or weren't there on Tuesday,
Mhm.
that student is going to be lost. That student should be lost, right? Because what you taught on Monday and Tuesday, if it has value, the
Mhm.
student misses it, like it's going to be really hard for that student. So as a teacher, you're in a really uncomfortable position. I want this student who just came back to catch up. I want to support them. But I also have all these students who are in my room on Monday and Tuesday. They're ready to learn something new.
Mhm.
What do I do? And I felt
Mhm.
this so acutely at Eastern when, half of my class was there and ready to learn something new, but half of the students weren't there. Like, what do I do? I really had
Mhm.
no idea what to do. And nothing in my teacher training had prepared me for this sort of reality of teaching.
Yep, and this should sound very familiar to everybody. And when I was in the classroom, I had various different kinds of systems in place. There's, you know, you get the one student to write down what was happening for the day, and that goes in some sort of a folder. Or I think what I ended up doing a lot was trying to squeeze in a quick meeting with that student where I would quickly try to go over everything we had just done the day before and get them kind of caught up. And it just was never anywhere near enough, really, to do it. And sometimes they'd stay after school to try to catch up, which consumed a whole lot of my time. And then you would have the problem of, sure, you've got this one situation with these 10 students or even just two students or whatever being absent, but then the next day a different student might be absent. So everybody's participation and on top of thingsness is all, wonky. So at what point did you start to figure out a different way of managing this that worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had to figure it out pretty quickly. Otherwise, I was just going to be miserable. I mean, I
Mhm.
remember standing in my room and students would come in after missing a couple days and I would just get so frustrated and that
Mhm.
wasn't good for anyone. So if I was going to make it as a teacher, I needed to find a solution. I
Mhm.
tried those things you mentioned, but
Mhm.
if students could learn from just by getting the notes, like there would be no point in coming to school, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
the students who miss class are often the least able to stay after school for that makeup. So
Mhm.
I needed to figure out how my class itself could really meet these learners' needs. What I did first is I realized if I could take my direct instruction, what I was going to explain from the board, and put that on a video, then
Mhm.
at the very least it would be accessible to my students. And I was kind of intimidated by creating a video. This was before COVID, so I think,
Mhm.
by now many of your listeners have done this, but I didn't know what to do. What I did is I just started a video call with myself using Skype. I hit record,
Mm.
I explained something, and then I stopped recording.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a video that I could share with my students, and I put it online in our learning management system. And I said to my students, here's the video. If you're in class, you can learn with me, but if you miss class, my video is here. And that was decent as a start. But I realized some of the students who are absent, they might not have great internet access at home. It's not really fair to expect that they're going
Mm.
to learn just from my video
Mm-hmm.
when they come back. So then I realized when that student comes in on Wednesday, they shouldn't, if they missed Monday and Tuesday, they should come in and have the chance to start on Monday's lesson. They should pick up with what they missed or where they
Mm-hmm.
last left off. And so I had to sort of create a classroom where this was possible. And what that ultimately led to is a class where students were moving at their own paces. Like I was no longer at the board giving the day's lesson to anyone. All of my direct instruction was on videos. Students would come in, pick up at the last place they left off. It was amazing for me because I didn't have to stand in front of my room anymore and try
Mm-hmm.
to hold my class's attention. I could spend class checking in with my students, supporting them, seeing how they were doing as people. I really liked that.
Mm-hmm.
And every student was always appropriately challenged. Those students who were there at the first bell every day could move fast and, go through everything. Those students who missed class on Monday could start on Monday's lesson when they came in. And so it ended up becoming a system that worked well for my absent students. They knew when they came back, they could just pick up where they left off. It worked well for my students who were there every day. Also, they weren't held back by those absent students. And
Mm.
it worked well for me too. Like I was having fun in class. I became a teacher to get to know my students and work closely with them. And this style of instruction let me do that.
Did you ever find too that some of your students who had been present for the instruction or who were sort of on pace would go back and rewatch those videos that they had already seen anyway, just as a refresher or a review?
Of course, I think sometimes as teachers, we assume, okay, if the student was in class and they heard me say it,
Yeah.
they understand. And then we get to the test and we realize, oh, wow, they didn't understand. But as teachers, if we're delivering a single lesson per day, it's kind of like, well, we got to move on. So I hope they got it.
Hmm. I've sat in faculty meetings and had my principal standing there saying something, and then suddenly I realized, oh crap, I just zoned out for the last 60 seconds. I didn't hear what they just said. And so you can be any person in any situation in a live one shot deal of instruction. If you're not fully focused the whole time, you could either misunderstand or just not catch something.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is what I mean that I think this method of instruction actually works for all students because
Hmm.
you can be in class and you can be distracted. You can be having a bad day. Anything can happen that makes you miss that instruction.
Yeah.
It's so much nicer to learn when you have that, in a form that you can pause and rewatch. You don't feel stressed like, I got to catch everything the teacher says. And it's also nice for the teacher because the teacher doesn't feel that stress of like, I have to make sure all my students are listening when I explain this.
Yeah.
The teacher can spend class time walking around the room, sitting down with students, answering questions one on one, which is so much more comfortable for everyone than this situation where the student has to interrupt the class and ask a
Right.
question. I just found that this method of teaching had so many benefits.
And so if somebody's listening to this, because I know where this ended up. Like this will now be the fourth interview on this podcast that connects in a way to the Modern Classrooms project. So anybody that's been listening for a long time and has heard my interviews with Kareem may be familiar with this model. So we're going to circle back to what a beginner should do just to sort of solve the absentee problem, but jump us forward a little bit to what this could end up looking like. Because what I don't want to happen is I don't want somebody hearing this to say, That sounds good, but I don't know where to start. And this is overwhelming. And how do I change my current practices? I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants. So we're going to sort of give this sort of future projection of what a whole system could look like if a person really dives in and does this. But then we'll roll back again to what it can look like to just switch up one small thing. The way that you guys teach in the Modern Classrooms project, which has now been implemented in how many classrooms? Do you have a ballpark figure of how many teachers have started to do this?
It's so hard to know, but I know we've had about 80,000 teachers take our online courses.
Okay. And this is all subject areas and lots of different grade levels, correct?
Yeah, all over the world.
Okay. Okay. And you said an English teacher? No. Math.
Math teacher, yeah.
And Kareem was math too. So this
Yeah.
works definitely in math, but it can work in a lot of other subject areas too.
Yeah.
Okay. And so ultimately, what the full system looks like is self paced, mastery based, um, asynchronous sort of learning, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what the full system looks like is, and let's think about it from the student perspective. You walk into the room,
Mm-hmm.
you pick up where you last left off, the last thing you understood,
Mm-hmm.
you work on that. It's asynchronous in the sense that you're not tied to the teacher standing at the board, but
Mm-hmm.
you have a lot of other classmates in the room who are probably on similar things as you. So you might
Mm-hmm.
work with those you watch a video that
Mm-hmm.
replaces direct instruction. That's 5 or 10 minutes. You close
Mm-hmm.
your computer, you find classmates working on the same thing. You sort of work together to develop your understanding of the lesson's material. And once you're ready, you would take what we call as a mastery check. So you say, I understand lesson one. I'm ready to prove it. You take a quick assessment. This is 1 or 2 questions to show
Mm-hmm.
whether you understand it. If you understand it, great, you move on to the next lesson. If not, you go back to the previous lesson.
Mm-hmm.
You rewatch the video, you ask a classmate, you sit with your teacher to correct your misconception so that you're not developing learning gaps, you're sort of building your understanding one lesson at a time. And
Mm-hmm.
so in this kind of classroom, the teacher's not at the front of the room delivering, the same lesson to every student. Every student comes in, picks up at the right lesson for them, works on that and develops mastery. That's sort of where I got to after months and even years of kind of experimentation and figuring out what to do with my students.
Mm-hmm.
It started really small, which was how could I make an individual lesson more accessible to a student who missed class that day?
Got it.
And then what if they missed class 2 days in a row? How could they catch up? What would the students who were in class be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Starting with that problem of absenteeism really led me to a much more sort of comprehensive rethinking of how instruction should look.
Mm-hmm. And what you're ultimately doing is you're making two of yourself. You're you're putting your direct instruction self in a place that can be replicated over and over again, and you don't then your physical body can still be moving around doing other things while that other version of you is just doing the direct instruction. And I think sometimes when people hear about this approach, they imagine that everybody in the room is just sitting, it's like the Matrix, everyone's just plugged into machines and just being fed information digitally. And from talking to Kareem all these years and listening to you too, this is actually a much more interactive classroom, much more collaborative classroom. There's space for getting to know each other as people and having conversations and working in pairs and working in small groups and actually accessing you as the teacher more than they would if you were giving the direct instruction because you're available because that direct instruction piece has been taken care of by yourself on video.
Of course, yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's the entire goal of the technology is to facilitate that kind of conversation and interaction. If I'm coming back to class after I missed Monday and Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
the last thing I want is to sit there and have to sit through some lesson that I'm not prepared to understand.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk with my friends and catch up with them and ask them if they can help me, catch up on what I missed. I want to be able to ask my teacher for help and for support. And that's really difficult in a class where there's one lesson per day that all students are doing at the same time.
Right.
But if I'm able to, pick up where I left off, then and the teacher's not up at the board delivering the lesson, it becomes possible for me to have that kind of interaction.
So you mentioned earlier that these videos are short. Is there a recommended length of time?
I try to keep it 5 to 10 minutes and much closer to 5 than to 10. The shorter is always the better.
Mm-hmm. And then from that point on, there are sort of application activities that happen for the students to do. I guess if it's a math class, that's pretty obvious that they're doing some sort of problem sets or something like that to learn the math.
Yeah, I mean, I would think of the three elements of a lesson as being sort of a direct instruction from a teacher, which is on video, then something for students to do together to develop their understanding of what was covered in the video, and then some kind of brief individual assessment of mastery. So yes, in a math class, I might demonstrate something, students work on some problems together, then I give them one final problem to see if they understand. In a history class, the teacher might introduce a topic, and then the students work together to go through a document and try to understand the document and what it says, what it means, and then complete some assessment, showing that they understand it. In a foreign language class, you might watch a video explaining, okay, here's some new vocabulary. You might find a classmate and practice that vocabulary together, and then you might take a quick quiz at the end. So this can really look any way you want it, depending on your subject. The idea is just that students are in control of the learning, and students can move at their own pace, which just reflects the fact that every student ultimately has their own individual needs.
Yeah. If on this assessment piece, the student doesn't do well, what happens then?
That's such an important point, and I'm glad you asked. In a traditional kind of classroom, the teacher just moves on and sort of hopes the student understands. That's so hard for a student. You saw something, you didn't really understand it, but your teacher's on to the next thing.
Yeah.
You're going to have a gap that hurts your knowledge, and you might also lose some confidence too. Like, well, if I didn't understand Monday, how am I going to understand Tuesday? And knowledge builds on itself. So in my lessons and in a modern classroom lesson, I want to sit down with the student and make sure, okay, before you go to lesson 2, let's make sure you understand lesson 1. Prove it to me. If you do, great. But if not, let's make sure you understand that lesson 1 first. You can go back to my video. Here are a few of your classmates who have shown me they understand lesson 1. You could ask them for help. I can explain your mistake to you. It's a different way of thinking about learning, that students should, be achieving mastery of each successive lesson before they advance.
Yeah. Hey, this is Jen. I am going to interrupt this episode for just a minute to tell you about something I think will be a big help to you as an educator, whether you're a teacher, a school leader, an instructional coach, or even someone studying to become a teacher. It's something I've been publishing for the last 10 years called The Teacher's Guide to Tech, and it's basically an encyclopedia of tech tools curated especially for teachers. My team and I keep an eye on all the tech tools that are out there, the ones that are fresh and new, and the ones that have stood the test of time, and we think about how they can best be used in classrooms. Then we sort them into categories, give you a really simple description of what each one does, provide a link to the tool's website so you can check it out, and we also pick out a video that shows the tool in action so you can understand quickly how it works and if it will work for you. And because tech changes all the time, we have to maintain these listings to make sure they stay fresh and accurate. On top of that, we have a really nice collection of articles we've written that will help you explore more ways to use tech and fine-tune and troubleshoot things as you go along. Plus, there's a huge glossary of tech terms to help you stay current with the language. In the past, this guide was published as a PDF that we updated once a year. Although this worked fine, that PDF would stay the same all year until the new edition came out. In January of 2025, we moved the entire guide to a fully online subscription-based model. This allows us to update it all year round, keeping it fresh and new all the time. A year's subscription costs exactly the same as the PDF used to cost, so we haven't raised the price one bit, and it's even more affordable if you get it as a group. To learn more about how this guide can help you become the most tech-savvy teacher in your school, visit teachersguidetotech.com. So if I'm listening to this and I do nothing like this yet, and I'm thinking, yes, I've always had this problem with absent students and this sounds doable, but how do I even start? If I've got a set of lesson plans coming up this coming week, what would I do to start this?
That's a great question. And I understand that this sort of like whole modern classroom model I'm describing
Mm,
sounds different and intimidating. So actually, part of the reason I wrote the book was to break it down into what I think are the simplest possible steps
mm-hmm.
to do this. And, when I was doing this, I didn't set out to create my own instructional model. I set out to
Right.
get through the day and make
Yes.
sure that, my advanced students, my struggling students, my absent students could come in and learn, and I didn't feel like a failure. So
Mm-hmm.
it started from something very small, which was, can I get through the day? And
Yep.
has now turned into something much larger, which is this global community of teachers. But I think the first thing to do is just take something you understand and try to make a video about it. And don't worry about creating a fancy video or a
Mm,
perfect video or something super engaging. You know, it's possible to think, "Oh gosh, the videos on YouTube are so good. How can I compare?"
yeah.
You don't need to,
Right.
It's not important to be professional with the videos. It's important to be personal. So
Hmm.
it can be as simple as starting a Zoom call, hitting
Mm-hmm.
record, explaining something, hitting end recording. You now
Mm,
have a video that you can make accessible to your
mm-hmm.
students. They can watch in class, they can watch at home, they can watch if they're absent, their families can watch. It helps involve families in instruction. That's a simple first step. Once you have that, you can start to think, well, how do I spend my time in class? If my
Mm,
students are learning from the video, I don't need to stand at the board and police
mm,
behavior.
mm-hmm.
I can walk around, I can talk to my students. After that, you might think, okay, this is pretty fun. Like, my students are learning from me on the videos. I've cloned myself. I'm hanging out with my students in class. How do I make sure they understand? That's when you might start thinking about mastery checks. And then it just builds,
Mm.
one piece one piece at a time. Pretty soon your whole classroom is, functioning
Kind
differently.
of running on its
Your
own.
your students are learning more and you're probably having more fun too. It was definitely my experience.
So they could start by just if I've got a week ahead of me, 4 days of just direct instruction and then like some sort of an exam at the last day, I could just make videos for those 4 days and do the rest of the class exactly the same way, but just have them watch the video. Would I just project the video, or am I looking at putting them on Chromebooks if we have those, and you know, earbuds and listening to them independently, or would I just watch the video as a class to start with?
I know a lot of teachers who watch the video as a class to start with, just to get students sort of accustomed to this idea
Mm-hmm.
of learning from a video. Personally, I think the sooner you can put students in control of their own learning, the
Mm.
better. So if you have a few Chromebooks,
Mm-hmm.
you can, or even some desktop computers in a station, you can say, go watch the video, take 5 or 10 minutes, take some
Mm-hmm.
notes, then come back and let's find a classmate to work with on developing your understanding.
Okay, that's good
You don't you
advice.
don't
Yeah.
you don't need a ton of technology because the video is just a small part of each lesson.
Yeah.
Um, and that way, I know we're talking about absent students here. Like, your student who missed class on Monday isn't going to come in on Tuesday totally lost. They'll
Right.
be able to watch that video and catch up.
And in terms of storage, I'm assuming that once you start doing this regularly, you're going to need to have a pretty easy to follow system for storing and accessing these videos. I'm assuming a lot of teachers are doing this in probably Google Classroom is a common one, maybe Canvas. Where are they storing these, and how does that go for them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the learning management system like Google Classroom or
Mm-hmm.
Canvas is the best place to store
Mm-hmm.
them. Really, you just can have sort of a list of links there. And,
Yeah.
if listeners are thinking, okay, what platform do I use to record the video or the learning
Mm.
management system? Maybe you can just share in the notes some information from Modern Classrooms Project.
Mm-hmm.
We're a nonprofit and we have tons of free
Yeah.
resources
Yeah.
to do it. I think when I was trying to do this in my own classroom and figure out how to deal with, students who were all over the place in terms of their attendance, their interests, their previous skills, I felt like where there's a will, there's a way, and
Mm.
I'm gonna do this and I'll find a way to do it. And listeners, you'll do that too. Like, there are lots of people who have done this. There were lots of people who had done it before me. There are lots of people in the modern classroom community who have been through these steps, challenging as they may seem,
Mm.
and figured out a way to do it.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more again about the book. It's called Meet Every Learner's Needs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, you're just basically outlining the modern classroom's approach to running a classroom.
Yeah, I call the book 10% memoir, 10% manifesto, and 80% manual.
Got
So
it.
the memoir is, sharing my story just in the way I've shared it with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can understand where I struggled, where
Yep.
I succeeded, why I did this, it will help you as a teacher understand, where did this model come from and why does it exist. The manifesto part is sharing what I believe is true about education, which is that every learner has different needs. The teacher's job is to try their best to meet each of those learners' needs, and that teaching is and should always be a really human profession where the
Mm.
teacher is spending time getting to know and building relationships with and and inspiring the students instead of what teachers often spend so much time doing, which is repeating themselves and controlling behavior and
Yeah.
those things that just they're part of teaching, but
Right.
how can we put the emphasis on being human, which is why we probably became teachers in the first
Mm.
place.
I think that's such a good reminder too, because I think that technology resistant people in general, but teachers also, believe that the more tech we use, the less humanized our instruction gets. And if you're doing it the right way, it's just the opposite. You're getting some of the rote, repetitive, administrative stuff that we have to do as teachers, things that drain us, getting those things more efficient and out of the way so that you actually do have more time for the human stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're technology resistant, I think that's good. I think we all should be, skeptical of technology,
Yeah.
but I think we should think about how can something like a video help those absent students? How
Right.
can it help me as a teacher use my time in a different way? How can it help me clone myself? And I think that does lead to a classroom that's more human. Um,
Yeah.
what I try to do in the book is just go really step by step. Here's something simple you can do today to create your first video. Okay, you have a video, you created it yourself or you found one you like online, because that can work too. Great. The next thing you can do is get your students working together. Make sure
Mm.
there's a lot of collaboration and fun in your classroom. After that, how do you make sure students are understanding? So it's really meant to be sort of a step-by-step guide to doing this in your own classroom. And you can do as many or as few of these steps as make sense to you, right? I don't want to tell any teacher what to do. I just want to share what worked for me, what's worked for other modern classroom educators, and in hopes that it can help some teachers do a little bit better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I hope that I've been recommending modern classrooms to people for years, and I hope they will check out your book, because that's an even quicker way to learn how to do this. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
To read Robert's post and get links to his book, visit cultivepedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 245. To get a regular email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.